The Peacock Angel, Chapter 5, Bahzane and Shaikh Ubekr. May spiders weave their delicate webs over martial gear. May none any more so much as name the cry of onset, said Theocritus in Adele 16. Khatun, will you speak to the Chaush, sergeant of the police? He's angry and says he will stay here no longer, and the other policemen want you to come and persuade him. It was Jadon with my servant, Mikhail, who spoke, seeking me early the next morning. The police were our neighbors, and I knew the sturdy Kurdish sergeant, baked by many summer suns, as a most respectable man. As I went along, both explained what had happened. A Yazidi man had run off with a woman outside his caste, and the lives of both were in danger. They had fled for protection to the police, who counseled them to leave Mashika. The lovers were poor and could ill afford the car, which the police subordinates, wanting to get to Mosul quickly for reasons of their own, tried to make them hire. The sergeant had taken the part of the eloping couple. Now, class warfare to that degree is actually an advanced feature of society rather than a primitive, outdated thing. There are issues with it, and I don't side with it. But it is the example of what people bring up, like, oh, well, we're more advanced nowadays and we don't do that. And it's like, well, there's some form of it that they bring in, right? Wallah, my Afrad are not good men, he chided. They will not obey me, and I shall resign. Close by sat the couple in the taxi summoned by the police. The men looked sheepish when I did my best to reason with them and declared that they had only one wish, and that was the sergeant should not leave them. The matter was settled with ludicrous speed. The sergeant would stay for your sake. The taxi was dismissed, and the couple escorted whither they wished. I could not imagine why I had been called in at all. Perhaps it was to witness the sergeant's impeccability, unless I had heard only a part of the story. I wanted to return that morning to Bahzane to inquire after the injured child. As we set out, Jadon inquired diffidently whether I would turn aside a moment to visit the house of his sheikh. Jadon was hereditarily attached to the clan of Sheikh Sajaddin, and on the night of our arrival, he had eaten supper with them. That very morning, a shower having fallen during the night, I had seen a comely girl on the roof spreading out to dry the joyous woolen rug in which Jadon wrapped himself to sleep, and on asking who she was, I heard that she was of the household of Jadon's sheikh. Jadon told me that his sheikh was in prison, and that the old sheikha, his mother, the women, and the children were exiled from the Sinjar and lived in Bashika. What has your sheikh done? Khatun had trouble when the law about conscription came in. He helped some Yazidis who escaped into Syria. Military service is an old grievance. It caused a rebellion most bloodily quelled in Turkish times before the Great War. The trouble was settled by certain concessions at the instance of Sir Henry Layard, the Assyriologist, through the meditation of the British ambassador at Port. War is not actually contrary to the Yazidi creed, but close contact with infidel companions in arms who eat foods that are polluting and force the Yazidi to break his ritual laws is abhorrent to them. The very dress of a soldier contravenes the faith, for a lady Yazidi wears a shirt with a wide collar, cut loosely in front and fastened behind, and at prayer time he lifts the hem of the neck to his lips, which is an odd feature, right? But yeah, religious freedom is important, even amongst the army. Military hospitals should definitely let in the clergy that want to operate there, and it certainly shouldn't be turned into a secular alternative of whatever. The state should just stay out of that. Typically, the I don't know, is that the thing that people are typically, oh, we can't join the army? I would think typically there's certain ideas of what a just war is or what isn't that would keep people from joining, but the Yazidi aren't as moralistic in that respect. Accordingly, when the Iraqi government introduced conscription, the Yazidis again showed opposition, and Bekr Sikhi, the general who murdered Ja'afar Pasha and was responsible for the Assyrian atrocities, quelled them with brutal severity. It was the religious leaders who were behind the resistance. Some were hanged, others sentenced to long terms of imprisonment. The majority of the younger men now accept the situation, and it may be that the European war has done more than a little to convince them that a man can no longer live securely within his own religious and racial palisade. Now, in a way you can, because part of the insecurity is people are willing to fight, people of their own tribe on the other side, of their own religion on the other side. And the Sheikha lived nearby. When I entered the courtyard, she came forward to meet me, a frail but dignified figure clad in white cotton, a white woolen mazar, a kind of toga slung over her shoulder, and the white veil from her turban brought wimple-wise over her chin. Jadon told me her name, Sit Gul. There were marks of poverty about the place. Nevertheless, tea was brewed for me, and they insisted that I should eat some mouthfuls of paper thin bread, dipped in a bowl of cream and sugar, and a bowl of butter and sugar. The butter and cream were products of their own cow, and were wholesome, though flies swarmed above them, and a few of the cow's hairs were visible. One ignores such trifles, and I ate a mouthful or two and praised the flavor. Well, milk of the same cow was like, what difference does that make? Really much. Watched by the Sheikha, 3 younger women and 8 children, 2 being babies and arms. I took leave when politeness permitted and continued in my way. And the curved entrance ways, they kind of remind you of a cave and maybe some other stuff, are typical for entryways in Yazidi homes. Particularly, I mean, if they have a courtyard for their house in particular. We returned to Bahzane by the way of the little gorge and the shrine of Sheikh Mund. The sound of the rushing stream was punctuated by the thump-thump of the women's clubs at the washing pool, where clothes were spread out on the hot rocks, and naked children bathed whilst their mothers worked. The upper stream passes by the shrine, and I sat on its bank to rest. A few children gathered round me, shy but gentle-mannered. Oh boy, one boy about 11, with an intelligent, merry face, like one of Murillo's beggar boys, was, he informed me, the son of the Qawwal Salam, whom I had met in Bahzane on the previous day, and had promised to visit. 2 little girls carried baby brothers. When they pressed too close in friendly curiosity, Salman's son, whose name he told me was Hither, ordered them back, and when I crossed the stream by the stepping stones, he offered me his hand. By the swift stream grew a sacred mulberry tree. Haja Kalu, Hither told me, and its cult, being probably connected with that of the sacred spring of Sheikh Mond, Hither begged that I should now come to his father's house. So we set off through the narrow streets, dogs barking on the wall tops just by our heads. They bark at any stranger from another village, explained Hither. Well, particularly since, the smells are different from the different foods and such. Habal Salman was expecting us and met in the courtyard with us. But before going to sit with the men upstairs, I asked that Khidr might take me to his mother. The small living room was crowded with women, and as usual, a mattress and cushions were draped out, upon which they insisted I should sit. We began to talk clothes. Amidst much merriment, I wrote down the names of all their garments, undergarments, and jewelry. Only younger women wore the flashing headdresses of coins, amongst which I once espied an English sixpence. The helmet cap is called the Kmedrave, and as soon as a woman has passed her 30th year or even before, she hands on the heirloom to a younger daughter or niece. Older women wear only a turban, a dark-colored kerchief being folded across the forehead. The matrons bring the white wimple, a loose white veil called the lachek, placed over the turban across the lower part of the face. One of the things about that is in some of the cultures that aren't so moralistic in a way, the women have a display when they're young women before they're married, and then that display, they lose some of the color and flashiness, or maybe they cover more or something once they get married. Other cultures, it's the older women that once that 30s, definitely not the cutoff. It's older than that, more like 50 or something, where then one's allowed to to uncover a little bit, compared to full modesty. Girls wear more ornaments than their mothers. The turban, the chamadana, is composed of several silk kerchiefs, and into these are stuck a silver pin with a ball head, to which a second pin is attached by a chain called a derze, so arranged that the chain is draped at one side of the turban. The center of the head is uncovered by the turban and shows the kumadrave in all its glory. The dress is elaborate along chemise, called kraas or kiraz, and baggy trousers, darpa, are worn, and above these, in chilly weather, a short sleeveless jacket called a bindana. Next comes the outer jacket, kotek, and over all is draped the mazar, a woolen toga or shawl, which hangs loose and square behind, and which is brought under the left arm and knotted on the right shoulder. This is homespun, and the women dye it red, yellow, or orange, often adding embroidery in other colors. As for jewelry, they wear earrings, gohar, usually of gold, filigree with a stone or two, and often triangular in shape, bracelets, bahzane, hinged and fastened with a pin securing the two halves, are of silver, are gold, and sometimes set with precious or semi-precious stones. Yazidi girls wear no anklets, but prefer several necklaces of beads and wear a long silver chain round the neck, to which is attached a large crescent-shaped ornament, barbeng, like an amulet case, and a triangular silver boxes on either side of it. These three cases are further decorated with small silver bells, 9 hang from the crescent, and 3 apiece from the triangles. I asked if these boxes contained talismans, but they told me no, they were filled with beeswax. Now, at some bars, at some point, they might have been filled with talismans, and the 9 is important, of course, because as much as people talk of the 7, there's the one over that, and the final over that in some of the advanced cosmologies of the Yazidi. And nowadays, people like call that faith Ahrimanism. But and so 6 on each side. So what's the importance of the number 15? And think of it, in the tarot, number 15 is the devil card. And it's round the waist, the girls wear a soft-folded sash. Oh, the kabara is the sash. The ornament is the barbingwick. Okay, sorry about that. Brides and even some of the unmarried girls wear a stiff belt about 1.5 inches wide, fastened with a huge embossed silver buckle secured by a silver pin. When it came to looking at their tattooing, the women laughingly shooed away the men who waited at the doorway. But of tattooing, I will speak elsewhere. I could no longer keep my host waiting. And Kidder took me from the courtyard by the outside stairway to the upper room. The Kawals, a bearded man with a gentle expression, had prepared tea, and I stayed his hand as he prepared to fill the tea glass with sugar. What kind of tea is that? They all exclaimed with feigned disgust, for their own tea is a sherbet. Latter, on my kind host roast, ground and made me coffee. In this upper room were benches with of a wide convenient for of a width convenient for sitting cross-legged, and a number of guests were gathered round the room. And one of the things is some cultures, they grind their teas, so it's not just they're soaking leaves. You use them all. And I've you see some of those sold that are just almost entirely sugar. You think you're getting a good deal if you don't read the package. Conversation fell upon foods forbidden to the Yazidis, and I asked Qabal Salman to enlighten me on this matter, as I had heard conflicting reports. Cabbage we may not eat, he said, but cauliflower is allowed. Lubia, broad beans, ladies' fingers, and lettuce are forbidden. Some of the men protested. Not lubia. In the Sinjar, they eat broad beans, he insisted, but here it is forbidden. As to ladies' fingers, there are those who eat them. But it should not be. Fish is haram because it cannot be slaughtered in the proper way. But as for other meats, we may kill and eat any creature permitted by Muslim law, including gazelle and birds. Like Muslims, we eat no pig. Well, bamia is a glutinous vegetable, so ladies' fingers is bamia. And well, one of the things you find is you can identify certain tribes of the Yazidi and other alternative spiritual groups, as we would call it, by certain prohibitions like that. I asked the Kawal about sowing and harvest, for the Saba in the south will neither sow nor transplant in the dark of the moon. Do they mean the 3 days where you probably don't see the moon? He replied that the Yazidis had no preference. for the crescent moon. When I rose to go, he offered to take me to an olive grove about half an hour away from Bahzane to see the mazar of Shaikh Ubekr. Repeating the name, I said Shaikh Ubekr, but was corrected. The name is Shaikh Ubekr, and someone in the room said it means a pure man who is not married. Accordingly, we set out, crossing the stream by the olive trees under which ganders and geese, with families of yellow goslings, cropped the grass and hissed at us as we passed. Further up the valley were olive presses cut in the living rock. On a sloping shelf of rock, a barefoot man stood, treading out the oil from a sack of olives. Near him, water was being heated in pots, and from time to time, a basinful was handed to him as he kept up his measured dance on the olives. He poured the hot water over the sack as if it were a libation to some god of increase, not ceasing the while to tread. The oil which oozed from the sack ran over the rock, fell into a cistern of water beneath and gathered on the surface, to be skimmed off later and stored in petroleum tins. Now, nowadays we know that petroleum is not necessarily something to expose yourself to or your food or whatever, but you can make certain things spiritual acts, and a lot of Sufi orders kind of stem from the the work orders, and some of the Yazidi groups, I presume, would be the same thing. And no, the Yazidi are not a spin-off of the Sufis, nor is it started by a Sufi who, wanted to mix some stuff together or something. The shrine of Shaikh Ubekr lies to the northwest. The building is surmounted by a conical fluted spire. The courtyard is surrounded by a low wall, and at the back of the shrine is a room and kitchen for pilgrims. Its real sanctity, however, lies in the cave beside it, the floor of which is partially submerged in ice-cold, clear water from a spring in the rock. The water flowing out has cut its way deep through the ferny banks to irrigate an olive grove. In the sacred pool are small fish and what appear to be enormous tadpoles, but which are neither black nor of the usual shape. Maiden hair grows on the steep banks of the stream. Good, said Jadon, for curing warts. By the sacred spring, as usual, stood the sacred tree, a mulberry, to which many votive rags had been tied. I asked the Qual how the shrine spires are made. First, he said, a tall pole of the wood called ispindar, poplar, is brought as an offering, together with thinner poles of the same wood. A disc pierced with holes is fitted to the top of the center pole, and into these holes, slanting outwards at the bottom, are placed the thinner poles. When they are cemented over, that is, they are covered with juice. We returned, and on the way back saw children collecting something from the surface of a rock. What are they scraping up? I asked. Platooned. They are collecting dust to put between the baby's legs when they are small. You buy botra powder from a chemist for your children. We use this dust, which is free. Another day I gathered up some to examine it. It was a fine greenish gray clay, possibly a form of fuller's earth. And it does matter which clays and dirts and stuff are used, but yeah, we now know that the buying from a chemist and stuff like this has created all sorts of birth defects and deaths and all sorts of stuff when the natural thing. And some of these folk cures of lick this rock once a day when you're pregnant or something like that. It turns out, and obviously some of these things are handed down through the generations. some of these things have things to prevent postpartum depression and other ailments. But of course, I'm saying I'm all the science. And the poles with the small fish and the weird tadpoles, that reminds me of some of the Yazidi, not the Yazidi myths, the Zoroastrian myths. But the Yazidi, in a way, as far as a historical group, you have older possible origins for them than what you call the Zoroastrians. Maybe the people you call Zoroastrians go back 8,000 years. They very may well go back 6,000 years before Plato or something like that. But the Yazidi, they have roots that we can look at going back 30,000 years. The language has changed, sure. I'm not saying it's the same language or they're saying the same book. And definitely we are in the 6,773rd year of the Peacock angel coming down, and the origin of this tradition is supposed to be from that time, which makes it the longest continuing religious calendar, doesn't it?